And at the moment we have 3 great artists. So we've got Jamie Shovlin, who's actually touring with his film Pint Meat and has a permanent, a solo exhibition at the Corner House Gallery at the moment in Manchester. We also have James Bridle, who's our inaugural I-Beam resident, and he'll be presenting a performance lecture on the 26th, this coming Wednesday, here in this event space. And I also programme across the Media Lab, which is situated in Mare Street in Space Studios headquarters. And during the course of the next year or so, I'm going to be programming transdisciplinary projects across both the White Building and the Media Lab to really sort of solidify the discourse around art and technology and putting an emphasis on experimentation and undefined outcomes. So that's my kind of plan for the year. And welcome, enjoy the show.
So before we see the first presentation, I want to encourage you when we have breaks between performances and presentations to go to the back corner and see the work by Kasia Mulga called Invisible Dust, and she's got a presentation there and she can show. Thank you. Sorry, I got it wrong. Go and talk to her about her very interesting new project. And without leaving it too long, I'd like to present Invisible Flock, who are going to show their new work that they're working on at the moment. And I'm going to grab my wine. So without further ado, Invisible Flock.
Hi, we're Invisible Flock. My name is Victoria and this is Rich. We are a group of artists based in Leeds in the north of England. There's 3 of us in total. The thing we're going to talk you through tonight is a brand new piece of work for us, one that we've only been sort of developing for like the past 6 weeks, or practically developing for the past 6 weeks. So it's a really good opportunity for us to kind of run through where we're at with it and what the ideas are and to see how you guys respond. So I hope that's okay. We've got some really early kind of prototypes loaded up on a couple of phones as well, so if anyone is interested at the end and would like to sort of do a snippet of the experience, let us know. So just quickly a little bit of background about us. There we are. He's not in the company, but I'm in it. So we make interactive art. How we kind of brand ourselves, but that ranges in form depending on what we're making. So we make public art, performance, games, installation, all sorts, sometimes purely online work. But at the heart of everything we do is audience participation. We always use technology in our work. Sometimes it's very much at the forefront and it's a subject matter, but more often than not it's just a great vehicle for us to be able to express something. So this new piece of work we are currently working on is a piece called If You Go Away. We're describing it at the moment as a cinematic experience on mobile phones. So it's game-like, but in its most basic level, it's an app that you download onto your phone. It will be available for iOS and Android. And it is, it's a game, it's a narrative, it's also a public place of convergence. So it's a story that you experience primarily through binaural sounds and interactive written text. And it invites you to explore currently 7 real-world cities through the prism of a fictional map. As you physically walk through your own city or location. So it starts from an installation of a French tobacco counter that's hosted in each of the 7 locations, some in the UK, some internationally. You download the experience there and then you kind of off into the city and you're kind of following this fictional map. Rich is going to talk a little bit more about the kind of conceptual stuff behind the piece. I'm just going to run through kind of what it is, basically. So this is kind of some of the visual language we're working with at the moment. This is Dreamland in Margate, where we've just done a week's residency on the work. So the story you're following is you're journeying through a narrator's kind of selective amnesia as they try to piece back a city that's become kind of alien and fragmented to them. So you're kind of, following someone who feels very lost in a place that used to be familiar. And kind of our idea with that was to sort of deliberately try and disorientate you in the city that you're in, to kind of explore how we rewrite or reimagine places through our kind of emotional experiences and memories that we have in them. So we are using GPS to strap the fictional map to physically the real world of the city, so that the piece is very site responsive and site specific, which is very important to us in our work. But also in layering the kind of 7 places on top of one another, we create this kind of multiplayer experience that can potentially happen anywhere across the world, and people can sort of interact within the game and kind of pass each other as virtual shadows as they're playing it. And just as well as passing each other, we're looking at ways in which they can start to communicate. So if I was playing it, say, in Margate, I could communicate with a player who's playing in Lille or Ahmedabad or wherever. So that's the goal of setting itself. Something that's very hyper-local but also global. So this is, Rich is going to talk about this, I'm not going to go into it, but this is a project we've done for the past 3 years called Bring the Happy. It's kind of a large-scale mapping project, and with If You Go, it's a response to this work and kind of the complications with taking this work abroad, I suppose. That it's very logistically heavy. It goes out with 13 people on the road. It's a big installation. It's also a digital map. So with If You Go, we wanted to kind of design a work that was very specifically international. It was international in its content, in its ideas, in its heart, but also was a piece that we could more easily travel, I suppose. Say more than that, Rich, I don't want to step on your toes. So within the game, so what I was saying, really interested in how you can leave your permanent mark on the fictional world. So we like the idea that participants will be able to draw and write virtual notes on scraps of paper and drop them on the streets for people to then pick up and discover, or to leave prayers in city cathedrals so people in different cities can read them, to etch memories or thoughts onto kind of imagined buildings within the world. Again, so you get this kind of fictional world that begins to become kind of changed and populated by the people who are experiencing the game. I quite like the idea that that sort of will hopefully begin to create interesting kind of interactions and conversations across the 7 places. Cool. So the mobile phone we're interested in for a lot of reasons. We're interested in the intimacy of a device, the kind of removing and using people's own devices, removing the kind of potential barriers of work that is seemingly very techy. People have a kind of a natural, what's the word? Affinity with their phones, and kind of we've done a lot of work with kind of apps before that sort of immediately people know how to use their phones. It doesn't feel like, God, what have you given me? How am I going to get this wrong? So interested in that kind of natural usage of the phone, but also what modern mobile phones can kind of do for us in terms of interaction and interactive work. So we're looking at using kind of what data your phone naturally gathers and how we can use that data to change and mould and influence the fictional world. So, for example, if it's raining on the day that you play the experience, it will be raining in the fictional world. If you pick up your character picks up a newspaper in the fictional world, it will have today's headlines of your city. So as the fictional and the real really start to begin to bleed, so that it also becomes difficult to know which is which. And in that case, I'm going to hand over to Richie, who's going to explain why we're interested in that specifically.
And it's a big shout, and I probably won't be very articulate, so I apologise. I'm going to talk very, very briefly just about Bring the Happy, because it influences this piece of work, even though it's massively different. So, Bring the Happy began in 2009, 2010, and it was our response. It was just as the recession was really beginning to hit, and it was beginning to manifest itself in our high streets, and especially we're based in Leeds. And over a very short period of time, Leeds' high streets and some of its major shops began to empty out. So you'd have on its main drag, in what is actually fairly rich city, was losing the big bookshop, all of the clothes shops and stuff like that. And it's really beginning to have an obvious effect on the place where we lived. And simultaneously, whilst this was happening, a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the dialogue was about this broken Britain and about the idea that that it's broken and that we're unhappy. And we're interested in about having a different dialogue with the community in the city, and a positive dialogue. So we came with this project called Bring the Happy, which in its essence is a mapping project. We created a big modular map, 3D map of Leeds city centre that was in these light boxes. That's the city centre, and then the other boxes that went all around it were the various areas surrounding Leeds. And what we did is we asked people to tell us one moment or memory of happiness that's taken place at any point in your life, anywhere in the world. And if it took place in Leeds, it got physically marked onto the map in the place that existed in the form of a glass rod. And we asked people to tell us how happy it made them on a scale of 1 to 10. Now obviously that's arbitrary, but they decided what that scale meant. And depending on what scale they gave it, that determined how high the rod was. So if it's 10 out of 10, they got a long rod, and if it's 1 out of 10, they got a really short one, and everything else in between. And we set up in Leeds Market, which is the biggest indoor market in Europe, but it's also very good. The reason we wanted to be there is that we didn't want to be talking artist to artists. We wanted to be somewhere where there was the best offer of, I suppose, the spectrum of a city that reflected as much as you can, as much as you could, the whole gender, ethnicity, class that is available in the city. And Leeds Market is actually very good for that. So all the poshos go there, and everybody else goes there as well. And it doesn't matter what gender you are, what age, what ethnicity, everybody uses that place, even if it's just as a transient place because you go from the bus stop through it to the city centre. So it meant that we were there where there was a large footfall, which is what we're after, where there'd be a lot of people. And over the space of, we were there and we opened shop hours every day, 9 till 5. Over the course of the time there, we collected over 3,000 memories, which therefore created on the map this physical, undulating landscape of happiness that was just there. Now, it also had to have a direct conversation about arts and community, and it wasn't by any means university loved. It got a lot of abuse. A lot of people thought it was an absolute waste of time. A lot of people, thought that the money should be better spent on healthcare, cancer patients, poor kids, all of those sort of stuff. And people were angry about it. This was again right at the height of the recession, and there was a lot of anger there. But simultaneously, a lot of people really loved it. But for us, it started to question art actually in the community, what's art's value and everything about that. But then the second thing that came up about it was this imagined architecture. You speak to the people you spoke to for the longest periods of time were older people, just mainly because they had more time to be able to offer, and they would describe places that have long since disappeared or are now fully dilapidated, and they describe them in very emotional and very precise ways, even though by the very nature of the memory they were in some way false. It was an unfaithful but lovable recreation of an architecture. It wasn't, because you'd have multiple people telling you about the same building trying to describe it, but each was slightly different. So you started to get this imagined architecture that actually existed in a physical place but is no longer there. And they then in turn became stories that started being stories talking to stories. And this idea of the landscape of, not a psychogeography as such, but the idea of a landscape being an emotional geography, and that wayfinders, rather than being the usual things that tell you it's 2 miles to this way or a mile to that way, started becoming things that said, this is where that person had their first kiss, this is where that person's father died of cancer, this is where that person decided for the first time that they were going to change their life completely and do something different. And each one of these little blue dots is obviously somebody's memories, and you get this beautiful thing that, for instance, these two here, often what would happen is that they're virtually the same memory. They might be like kissing in this park, my partner for the first time. but they're 50 years apart. And you go, there's some beautiful thing that these two people have never really talked to each other in real life, through the map have started to talk stories to each other. So what we want to do with If You Go Away is have stories that talk to each other about the landscape and start for you to build up this new landscape in the one that you're in. So what the device will do is have this abstracted map which you walk through, but will be strapped, of course, to the GPS of a real map. And over the course of how long you play it, we want the real world and the fictional world to become indecipherable from each other. And the way that we're hoping to do it as a cinematic experience is the very simple idea that we want you to think of your eyes as a camera lens, and that you are creating your city, whether you know it well or one that you're unused to, as a cinematic experience, and that you are the cameraman for an epic piece of cinema. And the sound is delivered through binaural sound, as Vic said, which is, I don't know if people know what binaural sound is, but just for those that don't, very quickly. Basically, binaural sound is a way of recording where you have two microphones in your ear, and the microphones use the ear canal as a receptor as well, so that when you play it back on headphones, it tricks the brain into thinking that you're in the same 3D space. So if whilst you're recording, you hear that behind your head, when you listen to it back on the headphones, it will feel that that's in exactly the same space. So it's sort of playing a 3D sound. But what it does is that even if you know that it isn't there, it's as if the messages come to your brain quicker than it can decide that it's not, that it does trick you. So even when I'm editing now, and I know what I'm editing, when I hear the footsteps running past me, my brain hasn't got time, it turns around before I can go, don't be stupid, Rich, you're in a studio by yourself, you nonce. So it's really, playing with that suddenly means that you can put a narrative on top of things without actually using any words. And we're going to try and be very sparse with the text. There is a text and there is a narrative, and you can interact with the narrative, but we want you to interact in a way where you affect emotion and you affect texture, rather than in possible traditional multi-threaded narratives where you affect action or effect or cause. So you won't be deciding whether you can go left or right, or whether you're going, or whether the character does this or that particularly. The plot narrative is set, but what you do is affect how you experience that narrative. And through the third person, you decide whether you are emotionally happy, whether you're emotionally sad through it, whether the character is grumpy, whether they're resilient, whether they decide to react to things in a negative way, or do they react to things in a positive way, which we hope is just as much a meaningful choice as the more traditional choices that might be offered in a game-like experience. So that over the course of time, you sort of assimilate with the character, even though the narrative is already predetermined in some way. And hopefully, by the end of it, when you've stepped through this experience, you will have found that over the period of time that they are, you have suddenly seen the town or city that you know very well in a completely different light, that it is in some ways changed forever, in the fact that you will never be able to look at one building in the same way without having a different emotional attachment to it. And that the game is in there to have room for you in it. So there are moments where if you're transitioning between places, it's very sparse, so that we don't want this happening. If we're trying to design where we're making it look like this, we don't want it all there. So when you're transitioning between places, hopefully you'll be getting a lot of this. And then when you're in locations that are predetermined through the GPS, you can then start to uncover a story a little bit better. That is the hope anyway. I'll tell you quick. So we try and do all our own coding and in tech. Mainly Ben does a lot of it, and Victoria does a lot of the visuals, and I'm in charge of a lot of the narrative. So we're all having to sort of learn new techniques. We're building it in a game engine called Unity, which is just very, very clever for what we want it to do. It can do a lot, but also you can import different software directly into it. So I'm currently trying to use something called Artisy, which is basically it's a game design engine, but it's very good for writing multi-threaded narratives in. And so what's good about that is it can be all written in there and then just uploaded straight into the Unity engine, so it's not really one thing and then having to be transcribed. It can just go straight in.
That's Unity.
That's Unity. We don't really. we're very new to Unity. So the prototype, we've done a prototype, which is like the first 3 minutes of a potential game, but not. It is very much in prototype bare bones form. And so at the moment, that is built in something called App Furnace, which is a lot more basic, but is a GPS triggering piece of software. But the idea is eventually it'll be used in Unity. But that's a sort of mediocre ending. Sorry. Thank you very much.
But please, sorry, as I say, please can ask us questions if anything wasn't clear or chat to us after. Thank you.